Cheryl Reeve just made a decision that's about to blow the doors off an already tense WNBA All-Star locker room, and A'ja Wilson is reportedly not taking it well at all. In the span of one announcement, the league's 30th season celebration just turned into something way bigger than an exhibition game in Chicago. We're talking about a captaincy choice that breaks decades of tradition, a veteran star's frustration finally boiling over, and a rookie sensation who's changed the entire trajectory of professional women's basketball in ways nobody saw coming. The fallout from this decision is already rippling through locker rooms, media rooms, and social media feeds across the country. But to understand why Wilson is upset, you need to know exactly what Reeve did, why she did it, and what it says about where the WNBA actually stands right now. This story goes way deeper than just picking a captain for one weekend. Cheryl Reeve is coaching one of the 2 All-Star squads in Chicago this weekend, and word is she's deciding on team captain duties right now, just days before tip-off. Normally that pick goes to the vocal leader, the multi-time MVP, the player who's held that armband before without anyone blinking. The captain slot typically belongs to someone who's earned it through championships, through seasons of dominance, through the kind of resume that makes the decision feel automatic. That's how it's always worked in the WNBA. That's the understood tradition. But instead of following that script, Reeve is reportedly leaning toward handing that role to Caitlin Clark. Not because of seniority, not because of championship rings sitting at home, not because Clark has spent a decade establishing herself as a veteran leader in this league. Reeve is making this choice because Clark is the one filling arenas. She's the one moving ratings numbers that executives in New York are paying attention to. She's the one selling out merchandise tables faster than inventory teams can restock them. This isn't a subtle distinction either. This is Reeve, the coach, essentially saying out loud that the captaincy matters less as a reward for career achievements and more as a strategic decision about who gets the spotlight for the league's biggest weekend celebration. That's a fundamentally different way of thinking about what a captain actually represents in professional basketball. And it's exactly the kind of move that would frustrate a veteran player who spent her entire career building credibility, earning accolades, and establishing herself as one of the absolute best to ever play this game. If you're A'ja Wilson, if you're sitting on 3 championships and 4 MVP awards, if you're someone who's legitimately earned the right to lead by example and accomplishment, then watching the captaincy go to a rookie, no matter how talented she is, feels less like basketball logic and more like a gut punch wrapped in business strategy. The timing makes it worse too. This isn't some quiet, behind-the-scenes decision that gets announced in a press release that most people miss. This is happening at the All-Star game. This is happening during the league's 30th season celebration. This is happening with cameras rolling and reporters camped out waiting for reactions. There's no way to soften the blow when the whole basketball world is watching it happen in real time. There's no private conversation where Wilson can process this before the narrative goes live. It's just happening, and everyone's already picking a side. What makes this decision actually newsworthy, though, isn't just that it breaks tradition. It's what the decision itself reveals about how the league is thinking about its future. Reeve isn't picking Clark because she wants to send Wilson a message or because she's trying to be petty. She's picking the player who brings the cameras. She's picking the player who makes the broadcast better. She's picking the player who makes casual fans tune in because they want to see what happens next. That's the entire job of an all-star game exhibition, put on the best possible show for a league celebrating 30 years of existence. But here's where it gets complicated. That logic, while completely understandable from a business standpoint, also sends a message to everyone in that locker room about what actually gets valued now. It says championships matter less than viral moments. It says years of dedication and accomplishment matter less than months of hype and highlight reels. It says the captaincy, which has always been about veteran leadership and earned respect, is now just another marketing tool. Clark didn't ask for this. She didn't campaign for the captaincy. She didn't go around trying to convince Reeve to pick her over Wilson. She just came into the WNBA and started playing basketball at a level that's forced everyone in the league to reconsider what's actually possible. And now she's caught in the middle of a situation where her mere presence on the court is enough to upset the established order of things. The captaincy announcement is just the most visible version of a tension that's been building since the moment she stepped foot on a WNBA court. Wilson's reported reaction to this news isn't hard to understand when you look at it from her perspective. She's earned everything she has. She's won championships. She's won MVPs. She's done all the things you're supposed to do to become a leader in this league. And now a rookie is being handed a spotlight that traditionally goes to someone exactly like her. That's not about jealousy necessarily. That's about fairness. That's about the rules of the game suddenly changing mid-game and nobody really explaining why. But as we're about to see, there's a lot more to this story than just one captaincy decision. If you want to understand why Reeve is making this decision, you don't have to dig very far. Look at what Clark just did on the court against the Seattle Storm, and suddenly the whole thing starts making sense from a pure basketball perspective. Clark just dropped a franchise record 45 points and 10 assists against Seattle in a single game, becoming the first player in WNBA history to post a 40-point, 10-assist performance. Not the first guard. Not the first Fever player. The first player, period, to accomplish that feat in nearly 30 years of WNBA basketball. That's not just a good night. That's not one of those games where everything happens to fall and a player gets hot from three and you ride the wave. That's an entirely different category of basketball performance. And here's the thing that makes it even more significant: she did all of it on a restricted workload. Clark played less than 30 minutes. She didn't get heavy minutes to pad her numbers. She was being managed carefully, brought along slowly, and she still managed to put up numbers that nobody else in this league has ever come close to touching. When you really break down that performance, it's not a hot shooting night. It's a player operating on a completely different level than everyone else on the court. And we're talking about everyone else, including her teammates, who had a great night too. Kelsey Mitchell, her backcourt partner, dropped 30 points of her own in that same game. Together, those two combined for 75 of Indiana's 110 total points. They were accounting for nearly 68% of their team's scoring output. That's dominance. But here's what made it even more impressive. Seattle was doubling Clark. They were sending extra bodies at her every single time she touched the ball. They were using multiple defenders to try to contain her in ways they don't typically have to do for rookies. And even with that level of defensive attention, even with teams literally changing their entire approach to try to slow her down, she still managed to find open teammates and set them up for easy looks while still getting her own points. That's elite-level basketball thinking mixed with elite-level execution. The point is this: if you're a coach trying to build the best possible broadcast for the league's 30th season celebration, if you're trying to put together a game that's going to draw viewership numbers and create memorable moments, you're looking at the player who just posted numbers nobody in this league has ever recorded. You're looking at the player who's moving ratings, selling tickets, and filling arenas. You're looking at the player whose presence on the court changes how defenses have to approach the entire game. That's not opinion. That's measurable, documented fact. The numbers speak for themselves. The box score doesn't lie. And when a coach like Reeve is making a captaincy decision for an all-star game that's supposed to showcase the league at its best, she's going to factor in who actually moves the needle. She's going to think about who makes the game better for viewers at home. She's going to consider who's most likely to create highlights that people are going to talk about for weeks afterward. Now, does that mean championships and MVP awards and years of dedication suddenly don't matter? Number Wilson absolutely earned respect through her accomplishments. But Clark earned something different through her performance. She earned the kind of attention that actually changes the business side of basketball. And in 2024, right now, as the WNBA is trying to grow and expand and reach new audiences, that matters. It matters a lot. The 45-point, 10-assist night against Seattle wasn't some random one-off explosion that happened to line up perfectly. It was a preview of what the rest of this season very likely looks like from here on out. Teams are going to keep trying new defensive schemes to contain her. She's going to keep adapting and finding new ways to hurt them. The numbers are probably only going to get more impressive from here. And every time a new record falls, every time she does something that's never been done before, It reinforces the decision Reeve made about who should be leading the All-Star team. But here's the thing. While the basketball logic makes sense, that doesn't mean everyone in the locker room sees it that way. It doesn't mean the veteran players who have been waiting for their turn, who have earned their stripes, who have proven themselves night after night for years, are just going to accept this without some serious friction. And that's where this whole situation gets genuinely messy. Here's where things get genuinely messy. Aja Wilson has reportedly said she needs to sit down with the players, and multiple outlets have pointed out that comment is specifically aimed at Clark after a string of altercations with referees that's had fans arguing for weeks about who actually gets the benefit of the doubt on the court. These aren't just random disagreements either. We're talking about specific moments where Clark spoke up to officials about calls she thought were wrong, and suddenly, those moments became national storylines with think pieces attached. Sports columnists weighed in. Social media exploded. The whole thing turned into this massive debate about fairness and respect and how young players should be treated by the officiating crew. But here's the problem with that narrative, and this is where things get unfair to Clark specifically. Aja Wilson has had her own run-ins with officials that got largely brushed off by the media. When Wilson barks at refs, when Wilson gets animated and shows frustration with a call she disagrees with, that's typically framed as passion. That's leadership. That's a veteran showing she cares about the game. But when Clark does the exact same thing, when she speaks up about a call, when she shows emotion about being wronged on the court, suddenly it becomes a referendum on her character, her respect for the game, her maturity level. Some fans have pointed out the irony pretty loudly too. Wilson can have her own confrontations with officials, and barely anyone outside of dedicated WNBA circles hears about it. But Clark brings up a legitimate concern to a referee, and within hours it's a full-blown national story with multiple angles and hot takes and think pieces about what it means for the league. That's not equal treatment. That's not fair application of the same standard to two different players. And it creates a situation where Clark is dealing with a level of scrutiny that's completely disproportionate to what she's actually doing on the court. So when Wilson requests this players' only meeting, the subtext is pretty clear. She's not just casually asking to have a conversation about basketball or league business. She's signaling that there's something specific she needs to address with Clark. The meeting is scheduled. The players know what it's about. And now we're waiting to see what actually gets said when everyone's in the same room. But here's what makes this situation so explosive. They're not on different teams. They're not players who can keep a comfortable distance and let the tension play out from afar. Wilson and Clark are teammates for this exact All-Star game, scheduled for July 25 in Chicago as part of the league's 30th season celebration. They're supposed to be sharing a locker room. They're supposed to be sharing a bench. They're supposed to be running the same game plan together. And now apparently they're sharing a captain's role that isn't going the direction Wilson is used to seeing it go. That's not a small wrinkle. That's not something you can just put aside and ignore for a weekend. That's the kind of setup that makes a tense situation into a genuinely uncomfortable one. You've got a veteran player who's been the leader in this league, who's earned her status through championships and MVPs, and now she's being asked to share a roster with a rookie who's being handed a captaincy role that traditionally goes to someone exactly like her. There's already chatter floating around that Wilson wants a word with Clark the moment she sees her at All-Star Weekend. Whether that ends up being an actual private conversation between the two of them behind closed doors or just more comments dropped courtside to reporters standing nearby with cameras rolling, either way, it's going to happen. And it's going to be captured in some form or another. The cameras are always rolling. The reporters are always listening. But here's what's important to understand about the context. This tension didn't just show up out of nowhere. It didn't start this week when Reeve made the captaincy decision. This has been building. It's been simmering under the surface since Clark arrived in the league. And every time something happens, every time Clark hits a new milestone, every time she breaks another record, every time she does something that captures national attention, the tension gets a little bit hotter. The players' only meeting request, the captaincy snub, the fact that they're now forced to share space for an entire weekend. All of this is just the surface-level version of something much deeper that's been developing for 2 straight years. This tension didn't just start when Caitlin Clark got named All-Star captain. This goes back further. In December 2024, A'ja Wilson sat down for an interview with Time magazine, and she said something that revealed exactly what's been bothering her about the entire situation. She talked about how the hype around Clark's rise was erasing WNBA history for a minute. Those were her words. She was careful with her language. She wasn't attacking Clark directly. She was raising a legitimate point about how when one player gets this much attention, especially a rookie, there's a risk that the decades of work that came before her gets overlooked. That's actually a fair point to make. Wilson has 3 championships and 4 MVP awards sitting in her trophy case. She's earned the right to speak on the league's history. She's one of the architects of where the WNBA currently stands. When she talks about the importance of remembering the players who built this league, she's not wrong. Those players deserve recognition. The decades of work deserve acknowledgement. Clark's arrival shouldn't make anyone forget about what came before her. But here's what's interesting. Wilson didn't stop making that point after one magazine interview. She keeps bringing it up. Almost every single media cycle around Clark, whether it's a magazine profile, an award show, or a random press availability, Wilson ends up somewhere in that conversation. We're talking about dozens of times over 2 years where she's referenced this concern about attention and hype and how it relates to league history. At some point, the sheer volume of the explanation starts telling its own story, whether that's the intention or not. If someone is genuinely unbothered by something, if they're truly at peace with a situation, they typically don't need to explain themselves 3, 4, 5 separate times across 18 months about exactly why they aren't bothered by it. The explanation actually becomes a bigger part of the story than the original issue. It shifts the narrative from Wilson is rightfully protecting league history to Wilson keeps bringing this up, which suggests it bothers her more than she's saying out loud. And that's the pattern that's emerged here. December 2024, Wilson makes the Time magazine comment. Throughout 2025, she keeps referencing it. Different contexts, different interviews, different settings, but the same core message keeps coming back. People are overlooking the players who built this league. Which is true, but the repetition itself becomes a signal. It becomes a way of saying, without saying it directly, this bothers me more than I want to admit. Now, Wilson absolutely has earned the right to voice concerns about how the league celebrates its history. Nobody serious is trying to diminish her accomplishments or suggest that her perspective doesn't matter. Her 3 championships are real. Her 4 MVPs are real. Her impact on this league is real. But the constant returning to this exact topic in interview after interview, year after year, starts to undercut the message a little bit. It starts to feel less like a principled stand about league history and more like something personal is simmering beneath the surface. The original comment in Time magazine made sense. It was thoughtful. It was measured. It was the kind of thing a veteran leader should be talking about. But when that comment keeps resurfacing, when it becomes the lens through which every conversation about Clark's success gets filtered, the conversation shifts. It stops being about protecting league history and starts being about Wilson's comfort level with not being the biggest star in the league anymore. And that's what makes the captaincy decision land the way it does, from Wilson's perspective. Because if the conversation was genuinely about league history and respect for what came before, then the captaincy decision should be about who's earned it through accomplishments. But if the conversation is actually about attention and spotlight and who gets to be the center of focus, then the captaincy decision reads as a clear message. The league cares more about who fills arenas than who built the league. The Time magazine comment opened a door. It created a space where these concerns could be discussed. But it also created a narrative that Wilson keeps coming back to, keeps referencing, keeps bringing up in different contexts. And now, when the captaincy goes to Clark, it feels like the culmination of 2 years of frustration that Wilson has been trying to package as concern about league history. Because that's what the careful language allows her to do. It lets her voice what might actually be personal frustration while framing it as something bigger and more important than just spotlight and attention. But the pattern, the repetition, the timing, the way it keeps surfacing every single time Clark does something impressive, that pattern tells a different story than the one Wilson is trying to tell about league history. And everyone in that Chicago locker room probably sees it that way too. Here's something important that just happened. Last week, Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, made a statement that tells you more about what's actually going on than any of the careful language coming from the players' side. He called Caitlin Clark a political football. That's a direct quote. He didn't say it as criticism. He said it as observation. He said it as someone who understands that Clark has become something bigger than a basketball player at this point. Think about what that phrase actually means. A political football is something that different groups fight over, argue about, and weaponize for their own purposes. It's something that gets caught in the middle of larger culture war debates that have nothing to do with the actual thing itself. And that's exactly what's happened to Clark. She's become a symbol. Some people see her as the savior of women's basketball. Some people see her as proof that the WNBA needed her to survive. Some people see her as a threat to established players. Some people see her as the victim of unfair treatment from officials. Some people see her as a bratty rookie who needs to learn her place. The reality of who Clark actually is just a basketball player trying to improve her game, trying to win, trying to be the best version of herself. That reality got buried under layers of narrative and culture war debate and social media arguments that have nothing to do with basketball anymore. And Silver acknowledging that out loud, calling her a political football, means the league office understands exactly what's happening here. It means the NBA has been watching this play out and trying to figure out how to manage it. Silver has walked a careful line for the better part of 2 years now. When Clark took a hard, flagrant foul from Kennedy Carter in 2024, Silver made a point of calling it a welcome to the league moment while also saying it wasn't out of the ordinary. He was trying to protect the growth that Clark represents for the league without fanning any flames that didn't need fanning. He was trying to let her develop as a player while also signaling to veteran players that this is how things work in professional basketball. But that approach only works if the conversation stays about basketball. The moment the conversation becomes about attention and spotlight and fairness and representation, and who deserves what, Silver's role becomes way more complicated. Because now he's not just managing a game or a season. He's managing a cultural moment. He's managing expectations. He's managing egos. He's trying to keep a league united while two different visions of what the WNBA should be are clashing in real time. The captaincy decision, from Silver's perspective, probably landed exactly the way he'd hoped it would. It's a clear message that the league values growth and ratings and accessibility to new audiences. It's a signal that the future of women's basketball depends on players like Clark bringing people to the arena. But it's also a direct confrontation with how things have traditionally worked in the WNBA, which is where the veteran players come in. Because here's what Silver probably understands that everyone else is starting to figure out. The WNBA has lost money every single year of its existence. Every single year. The league has operated at a loss since 1996. NBA teams have subsidized women's basketball as part of their own business strategy. And the only reason the league hasn't folded is because billionaires and NBA owners were willing to absorb those losses year after year. Clark's arrival changed that math. She's drawing crowds, she's moving ratings. She's creating the kind of interest that the league has been trying to manufacture for decades. And now suddenly, the conversation about what gets valued in the WNBA has shifted from, "What have you accomplished?" to, "What can you do for the league's future?" That's a fundamental change in how the league operates. It's also a fundamental threat to players who built their status on traditional measures of success. Silver knows this. That's why he's being careful. That's why he's acknowledging that Clark has become a political football. That's why the captaincy decision probably went to Reeve with some level of understanding that it would create friction, but that the league office believes the growth is worth it. But here's the thing about making that kind of decision in the age of social media and 24-hour sports coverage. There's no quiet way to do it. There's no announcement that doesn't immediately become a storyline. There's no choice that doesn't generate takes and arguments and think pieces. And when you're asking established players to share space with a rookie who's being handed traditional markers of respect and leadership, you're asking them to accept a new order of things, whether they like it or not. The political football comment from Silver essentially admits that the league office knows exactly what's happening here. They know Clark has become bigger than basketball. They know it's created friction. And they're hoping the growth she brings to the league justifies the tension that growth creates. That's a bet. That's a choice. And this weekend in Chicago is going to test whether that bet actually pays off or whether it just creates more problems down the road. Here's something that really reveals what's actually bothering A'ja Wilson about this whole situation. Back in 2024, Wilson admitted publicly that she dreaded playing in front of Indiana Fever crowds. Specifically, not other crowds, not neutral crowds, Indiana crowds. And the reason was clear. The overwhelming attention around Caitlin Clark had gotten so loud, so constant, so all-consuming that Wilson found it genuinely uncomfortable to play in that environment. That's a real statement. That's a real admission. That's not someone being petty or bitter. That's someone saying out loud that the level of attention Clark generates is so overwhelming that it affects how she feels about stepping on the court in certain arenas. For a player of Wilson's caliber, for someone who's won championships and MVPs and earned the right to play anywhere, to say that she dreads certain crowds because of how one player is treated, that tells you something significant about the scale of what's happening. And when you connect that older comment to this week's captain report and the reported team meeting request, it starts to look less like a one-off frustrated reaction and more like a pattern that's been quietly building for 2 straight years. It's the December Time magazine comment. It's the dread about playing in Indiana. It's the repeated references to league history across different interviews. It's the request for a players-only meeting with Clark. It's finally the reaction to not getting the captaincy. This isn't a single issue. This is an accumulation. This is 2 years of frustration surfacing in different ways at different times. And each time it surfaces, it gets a little bit more visible, a little bit more public, a little bit harder to ignore. The Time magazine comment was measured and thoughtful. The dread about Indiana crowds was a comment in passing. The team meeting request was more direct. And now the captaincy decision has forced everything into the open. But here's what's interesting about how Wilson has handled this publicly versus privately. She keeps saying that she's unbothered. She keeps saying that she's focused on her own game, her own team, her own goals. She keeps insisting that what's happening around Clark doesn't affect her or how she approaches basketball. And those statements might even be true to some extent. Wilson is probably genuinely focused on being the best player she can be. She probably is thinking about her own legacy and her own goals. But the sheer volume of times she's had to explain why she's unbothered starts to undercut that message. Because if a player is truly unbothered by something, if they're truly at peace with a situation, they usually don't need to explain themselves multiple times across 18 months. They just move on, they play basketball, they let their game speak. They don't keep coming back to the same topic in different interviews, different settings, different contexts. The repetition itself becomes the story. It's like if someone kept saying, "I'm not mad about what you did." If you have to say it once, okay. If you have to say it twice, maybe there's something there. But if you keep saying it over and over, in different ways, in different contexts, eventually people start to believe that you actually are mad, regardless of what you're saying out loud. Because actions speak louder than words, and the action of constantly explaining why you're not bothered is a pretty clear signal that something bothers you. And that's where the players' only meeting request comes in. That's where the captaincy reaction comes in. That's where this whole situation gets genuinely tense. Because Wilson's public statements about being unbothered are clashing with her private actions, which suggest that she's anything but unbothered. She's bothered. She's frustrated. She's at a point where she needs to have a conversation about it with the entire team. Which brings us back to the captaincy decision. Because from Wilson's perspective, this probably feels like the final straw. Like here she is, trying to handle this maturely, trying to frame her concerns as being about league history and respect for what came before, trying to stay composed and professional, and then Reeve just goes ahead and names Clark as captain anyway. It's not just a snub. It's a snub that happens on the national stage, during the league's 30th season celebration, in front of cameras that are going to capture every reaction. And now Wilson has to share a locker room with Clark. She has to play next to her. She has to pretend like this decision doesn't bother her while all the tension is simmering right beneath the surface. The meet and greet is going to happen. The words are going to be exchanged. And everyone's going to be watching to see how two of the league's biggest stars actually respond when the cameras are rolling. Here's something that needs to be said plainly, because a lot of people are dancing around it without actually stating it directly. Let's strip away all the careful language about protecting league history, about respect for what came before, about making sure veteran players get acknowledged. Let's strip away the measured tones and the thoughtful interviews and the specific framing about concern for how the league celebrates its past. What's actually happening here is something simpler and more human than all of that. A group of accomplished, decorated players are frustrated because they're not used to sharing the spotlight this dramatically. That's it. That's the core of it. Not league history, not unfair treatment, not the politics of how attention gets distributed, just the simple fact that for years, for the entire time these veterans have been playing, they've been the biggest stars in their sport. They've been the ones filling arenas. They've been the ones getting the endorsement deals. They've been the ones whose games meant something to casual fans and dedicated followers alike. And then Caitlin Clark shows up, and suddenly that changes. Suddenly there's a different level of attention. Suddenly there's a different kind of fan base. Suddenly there's a player who's moving numbers and ratings in ways that even the established stars weren't moving them. And for players who have spent their entire careers being the best, being the most important, being the center of attention in their sport, that's a genuinely difficult pill to swallow. But here's the thing, and it's important to say this clearly. Clark didn't take anything away from anyone by scoring 45 points against Seattle. She didn't steal Wilson's championship rings. She didn't erase her MVP awards. She didn't make her less accomplished or less skilled or less important to the history of women's basketball. Clark simply played basketball at an extremely high level, and the numbers did what numbers naturally do when a player performs that well on a given night. They moved. They got attention. They created headlines. Wilson still has 3 championships. Wilson still has 4 MVPs. Wilson is still one of the best players in the league. None of that changes because Clark had a great game. None of that changes because Clark is drawing bigger crowds. None of that changes because the captaincy went to Clark instead of Wilson. What changes is the relative attention. What changes is who gets the biggest spotlight. What changes is who casual fans, outside of dedicated WNBA circles, think about when they think about women's basketball. And that's genuinely hard to accept if you've spent your entire career being that person. If you're used to being the one everyone's talking about, the one everyone wants to see, the one whose mere presence on the court changes how defenses approach the game. And it's worth acknowledging that because it's human. It's real. It's the kind of thing that would frustrate anyone, no matter how accomplished they are. But here's where the responsibility part comes in. Here's where the veteran leadership part matters. Because Clark is going to keep doing what she's doing. She's going to keep scoring. She's going to keep getting attention. She's going to keep breaking records. And the only way that doesn't become a constant source of tension in the league is if the veteran players figure out how to coexist with that reality without constantly bringing it back up. Clark isn't clapping back at anyone publicly. She isn't posting subtle jabs after games. She isn't writing op-eds about how she's being disrespected. She's averaging historic numbers night after night and letting the box score handle whatever talking actually needs doing. That approach, quietly outproducing the surrounding noise instead of engaging with it head-on, tends to age a lot better than the alternative over time. And that's the contrast that matters here. Wilson keeps explaining herself. Clark keeps playing. Wilson keeps bringing up concerns. Clark keeps breaking records. Wilson keeps seeking conversations. Clark keeps letting her game speak. At some point, when that pattern becomes clear, when that contrast becomes obvious, the narrative shifts. It stops being about who deserves respect and starts being about who's actually handling the situation with grace. Because basketball is a sport that settles nearly every argument on the court every single night in ways press conferences and magazine interviews simply can't touch. You can talk all you want about fairness and history and respect. But when the game starts, when the ball goes up, the court tells the real story. And Clark is telling a story that's impossible to argue with right now. She's outplaying the noise. She's outproducing the criticism. She's letting her game answer the questions instead of trying to explain herself in interviews. And that, ultimately, is the most effective way to handle exactly what's happening right now. Not through meetings or conversations or magazine interviews. On the court, where basketball arguments get settled, where the numbers speak louder than the narrative, where actions matter more than explanations. This year's All-Star rosters weren't picked the usual way at all, and that's important context because it changes how every single decision this weekend gets scrutinized. Instead of the traditional voting process, instead of coaches picking, instead of some combination of player vote and media vote and executive decision, the league did something different. Legends Cynthia Cooper and Teresa Weatherspoon, two of the biggest names in WNBA history, served as honorary general managers. They drafted the teams live on ESPN, turning the whole selection process into its own broadcast event for the league's 30th season celebration. That choice was deliberate. That choice was designed to create television moments. That choice was made specifically because the league wanted the selection process itself to be entertaining, to be talked about, to be something that casual fans would actually tune in to watch. And it worked. People watched. People had opinions. People got invested in who was getting selected and why and what it meant for the overall balance of the rosters. So now you've got a situation where every single decision that's being made about these all-star rosters is happening under way more cameras and way more scrutiny than a normal all-star game usually gets. The captaincy decision isn't being made quietly behind closed doors. It's being announced to the media. It's being covered by national sports outlets. It's being debated on Twitter. It's becoming a storyline. And there's no way around it because the entire weekend is designed to be a spectacle. The entire event is built to generate content and discussion and debate. Which means there's no quiet way to hand Clark the captain armband over Wilson here. Everyone's going to see it happen. Everyone's going to have an opinion about it within minutes. The talking heads on sports television are going to break it down from every possible angle. Social media is going to explode with takes. Player reactions are going to be monitored and analyzed and debated. There's no announcement that doesn't immediately become a controversy. And that's exactly what happened. The decision got made, the decision got announced, and now we're living in the fallout. Wilson's reported negative reaction got reported. The players' only meeting request got reported. The tension became public, and everyone's waiting to see what actually happens when these two players share a locker room, a bench, and a whole weekend together. But here's what's important to understand about how Reeve made this decision. She knows what the cameras are going to do. She knows what the media is going to do. She knows what the social media reaction is going to be. She probably even knows that Wilson isn't going to take it well. And she made the decision anyway. Which means the calculation, from her perspective, is that the upside of having Clark as captain, the entertainment value, the ratings boost, the ticket sales, the highlight potential, outweighs the friction that's going to come from handing the role to a rookie over a 4-time MVP. That's a business decision. That's not a personal decision. That's not about who deserves the captaincy based on accomplishments. That's about who's going to make the All-Star game better from a television perspective. And while it makes complete sense from a business standpoint, and Reeve, as a coach in a professional league, absolutely has to think about those things, it also means she's deliberately choosing to create tension for the sake of the broadcast. Which brings us to the bigger picture. This weekend in Chicago isn't just an all-star game. It's the league's 30th season celebration. It's supposed to be about honoring where the WNBA has come from, acknowledging the players who built the league, and showcasing where it's going. But instead of a unified celebration of women's basketball, we're potentially getting a tense weekend with established stars frustrated about not getting traditional markers of respect, and a rookie trying to navigate being a symbol and a political football, and just a basketball player all at the same time. The rosters themselves are talented. The game is going to be competitive, but the narrative this weekend isn't going to be about basketball. The narrative is going to be about the captaincy, about Wilson's reaction, about whether Clark can handle the pressure, about whether the veteran players can get on the same page with the future of the league, about whether the WNBA's growth is worth the tension it's creating. And that's on Reeve, that's on the league office. That's on the choice to use the All-Star game as a platform for making bold statements about the future of women's basketball, rather than just letting it be a basketball game. Because you can't build a weekend around television moments and then act surprised when those moments create tension that bleeds over into the actual game itself. So here's what we're heading into this weekend. Chicago, July 25th. The league's 30th season celebration. 2 All-Star rosters. And somewhere in there, a captaincy drama that's been simmering since December 2024 got officially announced to the national media and is now going to play out in real time with cameras capturing every moment of it. There's already chatter floating around that A'ja Wilson wants a word with Caitlin Clark the moment she sees her at All-Star Weekend. Whether that ends up being an actual private conversation between the two of them behind closed doors, one of those moments where 2 professionals sit down and clear the air respectfully without cameras rolling, or whether it's just more comments dropped courtside to reporters standing nearby with cameras rolling and microphones ready, either way, it's going to happen. The conversation is coming. The tension is going to surface. And both players are going to have to figure out how to exist in the same space while all of this is happening. And here's what makes it even more complicated. They can't avoid each other. They're not on separate rosters where they can keep a comfortable distance. They're not going to play against each other on opposing teams where the tension plays out purely on the court. They're teammates. They're going to share a locker room. They're going to share a bench. They're going to run the same plays together. They're going to be next to each other constantly for the entire weekend. Avoiding the issue isn't an option. Processing it, working through it, figuring out how to coexist with it, that's what they have to do. But here's a prediction that honestly doesn't take much guessing at this point, given everything Clark has done all season. Whatever gets said in Chicago, whether it happens on camera or completely off it in some hallway nobody catches on video, whatever conversation happens or doesn't happen, whatever emotional moment gets captured or doesn't get captured, Clark is going to keep doing exactly what she's already been doing all season long. She's going to keep scoring in bunches against defenses that are throwing everything they have at her. She's going to keep setting up her teammates for easy looks night after night. She's going to keep breaking records that nobody else in this league's nearly 30-year history has ever come close to touching. The 45-point, 10-assist night against Seattle wasn't some random one-off explosion that happened to line up perfectly at the right moment. That was a preview of what the rest of this season is very likely going to look like from here on out. Teams are going to keep trying new defensive schemes to contain her. She's going to keep adapting and finding new ways to hurt them. The numbers are probably only going to get more impressive from here. And every time a new record falls, every time she does something that's never been done before, it reinforces the captaincy decision. It reinforces Reeve's choice. It reinforces the idea that this is the direction the league is moving, whether everyone is comfortable with it or not. Now, if Wilson genuinely wants the captaincy debate settled in her favor, if she wants the story to shift back toward the game itself, rather than who's getting picked to lead which team, the fastest and most effective path, there isn't a sit-down with reporters watching from courtside. It's not another magazine interview about attention and fairness and how the league celebrates history. It's outplaying the numbers Clark has been putting up all season. That's the actual solution here. That's how you answer this question definitively. Because the one thing basketball does better than any other sport is settle arguments on the court. You can talk all you want about fairness and respect and who deserves what. You can have meetings. You can give interviews. You can make your point 100 different ways. But ultimately, if you want to silence the narrative, if you want people to stop talking about the captaincy, if you want to regain the spotlight, you do it by playing better basketball than the person you think has been wronged you. That's how every real argument in basketball eventually gets settled. On the court, in front of everyone, with nothing left to talk about afterward except what actually happened in the box score. Numbers don't lie. Tape doesn't lie. Results don't lie. And if Wilson can post numbers and performances that rival what Clark has been doing, then the entire conversation shifts. Then the narrative becomes about competition and excellence rather than captaincy and fairness. But if Wilson doesn't match Clark's level on the court, if the numbers keep going the way they've been going, if Clark keeps putting up historic performances while Wilson is playing well, but not at that same historically dominant level, then no amount of meetings or magazine interviews is going to change the fact that the captaincy decision was the right one from a basketball standpoint. That's what this weekend is really testing. Not the two players' personalities or their mutual respect or whether they can get along. It's testing whether one player can actually match another on the basketball court. And basketball, more than anything else, is the one place where that question gets answered with absolute clarity. The stats don't argue. The tape speaks for itself. And that's where this whole saga ultimately gets settled. Whatever happens in Chicago this weekend, whether the conversation between Wilson and Clark is explosive or civil, whether it happens on camera or off, whether it creates more tension or somehow clears the air, the underlying reality isn't going to change. Caitlin Clark is going to keep playing at a historically dominant level. She's going to keep breaking records. She's going to keep drawing attention and ratings and ticket sales that the WNBA has been trying to manufacture for decades. And that's going to continue to create friction with veteran players who aren't used to sharing this kind of spotlight. But here's the thing about Clark's approach. She's handling it the right way, by not engaging with the narrative, by letting her game speak, by quietly outproducing the noise instead of getting caught up in it. And that approach probably ages better than anything else could. This weekend is just the beginning of how this story unfolds. The real answer gets settled on the court, night after night, for the rest of the season. That's where the truth lives.